Hello, I'm Karem Simon of the Department of Music at the University of Prince Edward Island. Welcome to this edition of our distinguished UPEI Music Alumni Series. Throughout this series of podcasts, we have invited our music alumni to share their music and professional journeys. In so doing, we look to our former students' past as a means of informing and perhaps inspiring our current students. Today's guest is saxophonist, music educator, and conductor, class of 1977 alumnus, Rowan FitzGerald. This podcast is being recorded in mid-December 2022. I am in Charlottetown, and Rowan is participating from his home in Stratford, Prince Edward Island. Welcome, Rowan.
Karem, thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so let's get started. And let's have you begin by describing your childhood and music-related experiences.
Okay. I remember really liking singing. I remember in my house on Rochford Street that the whole family often sang. There were occasions where we'd get together with my cousins and my uncles and aunts. We had a piano that my grandmother played and that my mother played, and everybody in the family gravitated to that and stood around the piano and sang like their lives depended on it. And it was quite a joyous thing in our house. So nobody was a professional musician or did anything particularly concertizing, but everybody loved to sing informally, and there were no inhibitions there, which was kind of cool. I remember also singing at school, and I remember singing at St. Peter's Church in the junior choir there. And I remember one particular occasion at West Kent School where Mrs. Parker was my teacher. And I was in grade 4, which was basically the last year the school was open, the old school, that is. I remember being on the 4th floor, all wooden floors, surrounded by windows, on risers, singing with my grade 4 class, Good King Wenceslas. And I was assigned the role of the page. So I sang a little solo when I was in grade 4, and that sticks with me for some reason. I remember in grade 5 moving out to the new West Kent School, and what I remember most about that year and the year following was my introduction to drama through a fellow named Ron Irving, who had just arrived. And Ron has distinguished himself as being an excellent and wonderful drama director in the intervening years. But I played the role of Scrooge in grade 6, and I remember it. And I only mention it because there are some major connections through drama to my stream as a musician. And I think had I not been involved in the drama side of things, I might not have been able to continue in music, strangely enough, through some convoluted circumstances. I remember going to school in Queen Charlotte in grade 7 and asking Jerry Rutan, who was newly arrived from the RCR band from Holland before that, and asking him for a saxophone. And I asked for a saxophone because my father's brother, Bill, we called him, but his name was Jeff, was a long-haul trucker in the United States. And he was the closest thing I've ever met to John Wayne. He was a big, good-looking fella. He was a soldier in the tank corps during the Second World War in the Pacific, and he played saxophone. And actually, he was a terrific musician. And he had played saxophone before he left the United States. Anyway, saxophone, I asked for Jerry. Jerry said, here's a clarinet. And that was it for grade 7, grade 8, and grade 9. Not much success on clarinet, wasn't getting much teaching. Jerry was a magnificent musician, but at that time he was a musician coming out of an army band and not much into the idea of educating youngsters in how to play an instrument. So as he developed, so did we. And in grade 9, I was involved with a drama company that did a musical called The Dandelion. And I played the role of the kid who owned the lion. And in the pit orchestra, the little orchestra of 4 or 5, Jerry Rutan played piano. We did a drama festival, we did a school tour around PEI, and then somebody decided that we should go to Halifax and Dartmouth and do the show over there. So at that time, going to Halifax or Dartmouth was represented by a 5-hour bus tour. You get on the bus in Charlottetown, you wait at the ferry, you get on the ferry, and so on. Well, I sat down and made a point of sitting down right next to Jerry Rutan. And for the 5 hours on the way over, I beseeched him to give me a saxophone and end my purgatory on clarinet. And on the way back, 5 hours, same thing. By the time we got home, Jerry got off the bus and said, please just come and see me and I'll give you a saxophone. And he did. And that probably was the pivotal time. I was thinking seriously of not continuing in music because of my frustration with clarinet and just how things were going. And it was totally different. Rolling into Colonel Gray in grade 10 with a saxophone and meeting all the people that I was to hang out with for the rest of my life. Roger Jabbour, Frank McKerney, Marjorie Smallwood, Jimmy Campbell, all of those folks. It was a new world for me and one that I loved and continue to love.
Terrific. So, can you pivot from there to high school and then high school moving on to university?
Sure. In high school, we were part of a centennial project where Jerry Rutan somehow had managed to receive a $60,000 centennial grant. Now, $60,000 back in 1966 was a considerable chunk of change. So he bought a whole flight of new instruments and quality instruments. I was playing on a Selmer Mark VI saxophone.
Very nice.
You can believe that. And the similar situations with my other colleagues. He got some great instruments. We were excited about playing. We were the first band in school, I think in PEI at that time. There were some other bands associated with extracurricular things, like there was a Summerside Legion band that was a very good band. But I think we were the first one that were in school and part of the curriculum. So we kind of felt that we were breaking new ground, and in fact we were. And Jerry pushed us like a crazy man. He wanted us to play, and we played all kinds of orchestral transcriptions in our first and second years. And I remember playing a couple of movements of the New World Symphony on those old Boozy and Hawks editions. And it was a brutally difficult piece of music, but we worked our tails off because we really liked this guy. And he inspired us to want to do what he wanted us to do, whether or not we were capable. So in grade 11, the summer of grade 11, we went to Toronto to play at the Canadian National Exhibition. They had a big band festival there. And we sort of melded that with a tour of Ontario. And we just and we stopped in Montreal and played there. And it was Expo 67 had just happened. So there were stages there, and we went through there and played in Toronto and stayed in Toronto. And it was just an incredible experience, bonding for the band with Jerry and with each other, but just hearing the other bands and actually doing rather well at that festival, surprisingly, after 2 years. But we had, in preparation for that, but we tried to cajole Jerry into coming in and rehearsing us every weekday summer evening the summer before we left. We left, I think, in mid-August, that festival. But in July and the first half of August, every weekday evening, we went out to the band mobile, the whole lot of us, whoever wasn't working at the time, and we rehearsed every night, all summer long until we left. We were just on fire to play. So when I left school, at the end of grade 12, I loved saxophone. My uncle had come home, given me an alto saxophone, an old one that he had. And I had taken all the pads off it and refurbished it as best I could. And it still played, so I was lucky there. And then went to Dalhousie University to become a lawyer. That was my chosen vocation, or so I thought at the time. But I still took my saxophone. I played in the Dow band, like the university band, not the wind ensemble or anything like that, but and loved to play. And then I got sick in my second year. I had already gone to visit the law school and they were going to accept me, but I got sick with Bell's palsy, actually an infection in my ear that caused a paralysis of the facial nerve. And the facial nerve controlled the corners of my mouth and my embouchure. So I was unable to make an embouchure, and that drove me crazy. And so I was in the hospital for quite a while getting rid of the infection and thinking about my career choices. I was going to be 19 years old. I was going to go to a law library and spend 3 years there and then start a career as a lawyer. And really, I was scared to death about what I had missed being sick in November of my second year at Dell. So I started thinking in terms of taking the rest of that year and doing something else. And I met with a friend of mine who'd come to visit me, Jim Campbell, trumpet player, who was having similar misgivings about his university career. So we hatched a plan to travel. We decided that we would just go and hitchhike west. When we got west, we thought we would go further west, maybe to Japan. We thought we'd crew out on a steamer from Vancouver. That was our plan. Well, that plan didn't take effect until September of 1972, but we did go. And I remember the final game of the Canada-Russia series that we all watched in my father's living room on Rochford Street. And the next day, Jim and I shouldered our packs and away we went. And that night, we had made it as far as Quebec City, and we stayed in the Bastille, which was a prison in Quebec City that had been transported into a hostel, if you like, or transformed into a hostel. And away we went. We were on the road then for the next 8 months and back at the end of March of 1973.
Okay. So what happened then? March 1973, what were you planning to do with your life?
A couple of things happened then. First of all, my ideas about the urgency with which I pursued law had changed. I thought, and when I got home in March of 1973, all my friends were in school, and most of them were in music at UPEI, which was then located in what is now Holland College, or Prince of Wales College, right on Grafton Street, in the second building, just up from the new gymnasium. So I hung out with them, and I met some of the faculty that were there at UPEI. And I thought, my friends are having, and I like my friends, and they were great people, smart, ambitious, energetic. And here they were having a great time doing music. So I thought, what do I have to lose if I try this for a year? I met Bill Bartlett. Bill Bartlett said, come and sit in with the band until we finish our rehearsals. And so I got to know the band and how he conducted the band. And I started to take a shine to his educational principles that were always on display in concert band. And I thought, this is something I'd really like to do. Then I didn't mention that I was in the Army band at the time, the militia band, the recce band, and I had started that in grade 10, 11, and 12. I had done basic training. I had been to Gagetown to teach cadets. And when we came back, the Army band was going to play for the centennial celebrations in 1973 in Prince Edward Island. So we spent the entire summer, I did, at sergeant's pay, touring around and doing every parade and every lobster festival and every potato festival that you could find on PEI with a 35-piece band. And it was a dandy little band. Jerry Rutten was the conductor, but we had just a heap of good players. So that was a wonderful summer. And then my prospects were, what shall I do in September? Well, I decided to sign up for music, and it didn't take long to figure out that this was something I really wanted to pursue.
Well, good. So you're at the University of Prince Edward Island. Could you speak to your focus while you were a student at UPEI, and perhaps what in particular about the program resonated with you?
I think, to be honest, my prime concern was I wanted to play saxophone, and I wanted to play it better than I could at the time. And Bill Bartlett ended up being my applied saxophone teacher. He was an oboist and an English hornist. I guess I can use that expression. But he was a great musician, and he was a master teacher, and he had some very successful programs in Midland, Ontario, where he came from originally. And we talked often about things external to playing saxophone, but he was very knowledgeable about saxophone. And he had taken some wonderful pedagogy courses with somebody at Western, whose name eludes me at the moment. But he also knew in the library who to send me to listen to great saxophone playing. And among others, and primary amongst the others, was Eugene Rousseau, who was the professor of saxophone at Indiana University. He had released a whole lot of educational recordings of he and a pianist doing all the great masterworks for saxophone up till that time. And his playing was just absolutely impeccable. So I had that sound in my ear right from the get-go with my saxophone lessons. The other people that were there at the time, Carl Mathis was teaching vocal and choral music, and I had the pleasure during my career at UPEI of singing with his chamber chorus, which is an experience that I treasure from those days. Alan Reeser taught history and was just a wonderful mentor. Keith Kinder was the brass professor at that time. Francis Gray was teaching piano and music theory. And I had my first meeting with Fran McBurney when Francis Gray was on sabbatical, maybe the second year that I was a student there. Although I wanted to play saxophone better and worked really hard on that, Bill Bartlett fired me up about music education. I would go to him certain days and say, Bill, I haven't prepared very well for my lesson. Can we talk about something else? And he'd go to his filing cabinet and pull out a series of class compositions that he had done with his grade 10 kids 5 years ago in Midland. And we talk about how that worked. And really, I knew in my heart of hearts that I wanted to teach, regardless of what circuitous route it took me to get there through playing. Teaching was going to be what I wanted to try. I had taught cadets. I had some experience at band camps at UPEI and with the Army. So yeah, it was that direction. So that was kind of my focus, saxophone and music ed. And okay. At that time, oh, sorry.
No, okay. So let's move on if we could. So here we are, 1977. You're armed with your undergraduate degree in music from the University of Prince Edward Island. What happened next?
I decided to take another year off after graduation, and I hoped to form a saxophone quartet in Charlottetown. And we did. We had a lovely saxophone quartet that played really nicely, and we worked. The problem was that we couldn't get firm commitments for time from everybody, and it got to be really difficult. Somebody had to deliver somebody's children, somebody had to pick up their girlfriend, somebody had to work that weekend, and everything got priority over the playing, as it would with people who were working for a living. So I was thinking, I would like to do some playing somewhere where there is more of a pool of saxophone players. And at that time, that fall, the Music Educators Conference in Nova Scotia was being held in Antigonish. So I noticed on the program that Jerry Danovich, the saxophone teacher at McGill, was down with his quartet to be guests and to do clinics at this Nova Scotia Music Educators Conference. So I went and I took my saxophone and I captured Jerry for a few moments and said, listen, would you be interested in hearing me play? I'm thinking that I'd like to come to Montreal. I'd love to study with you. So we went through that and he said, yes, he'd teach me if I got to Montreal. So in the new year, in the beginning of 78, my friend Sean Ferris, who was also a musician and a saxophone player, but had chosen to move on to McGill to study composition, was living in Montreal in a two-bedroom apartment with his partner, Gail McCachran, who was studying art at Concordia, by the way. Anyway, I called him and I asked him if he and Gail would accept me as a boarder for the 3 or 4 months that I would be in Montreal studying with Jerry Danovich. And he said yes. So I went there and I took my saxophones, my soprano and my alto. And I remember sitting outside Jerry's office waiting for my first lesson as just a guy off the street, and meeting a student from McGill who had just finished the lesson, a tenor player named Bob Casabon, and talking to Bob. It was a great guy. And by the time I was ready to go into my lesson, we had already arranged, he was going to ask an alto player and a baritone sax player to join us. And we were going to have a saxophone quartet rehearsal the next day in the practice rooms at McGill. And I thought, ooh, this is just why I came to Montreal. And we ended up having a really good saxophone quartet that just played for the fun of playing. It was nothing, they were all McGill students except me, but they loved to play, and they all had their own quartets that they played in, but we put together a quartet and we worked together for a couple of years and had quite a bit of success musically and competitionally as well. But that was the kind of experience I was looking for at McGill. And by golly, I found it on the first day of
Terrific.
yeah.
So you spent some time at McGill, but you also had the opportunity to get some instruction from Eugene Rousseau.
I did indeed. Again, Nova Scotia music educators provided the opportunity. Eugene Rousseau was invited from Indiana to come down and do the Nova Scotia Music Educators Conference when I was probably in my second year at UPEI. And so I got to hang out with him, and I spent a lot of time hanging out with him and hearing him play and listening to his recordings and talking to him. And I found out that he, in the summertime, did a 2-week session at Shell Lake, Wisconsin, right on Lake Michigan. Yeah, was that Lake Michigan? It was. And he had students from all over the world there, and he had assistants from there, but he was the primary teacher. It was in the summer. I applied for a grant to fly to Green Bay, Wisconsin. That's for that next summer from the Arts Council here, the PEI Arts Council. And I received funding from them. I flew to Shell Lake, spent an unbelievable 2 weeks in the presence of Eugene Rousseau and his students, met students from all over the United States, all over the world, actually, that were there. There were probably 40 saxophone players there. And it was just a wonderful experience. And then I hitchhiked home and went on with my studies. But I always kept in touch with Eugene Rousseau.
Good. So here it is. You've studied with two of the world's finest players, finest saxophone pedagogues, in Jerry Danovich and Eugene Rousseau. Then what happened?
Well, when I was studying with Jerry, the year that I was not a student, other than just informally with him, I went to see what they called the saxophone concert. And every year, the saxophone faculty, which was numerous, there were 4 or 5 people teaching saxophone there, Jerry sort of principal among them, they took over the big concert hall and presented ensembles and solos that were all related to saxophone. And I went to see this concert. Somebody was visiting me from PEI, and we went together. It might have been Roger. And we went and sat in the middle of the hall and listened to these students playing quartets, trios, solos, duets, and the level of the playing was extraordinary. It was mind-blowing. It was like listening to recordings, to be honest. And some of them really fine recordings. So I thought, oh my, I'm here to play saxophone and learn about playing saxophone. I couldn't be in a better spot than to come back here next year. So I signed up for the degree program, an advanced standing in the degree program for performance, and came to study officially as a student. And that year I did an audition and was pleased and delighted to be able to be welcomed into the wind ensemble there, which was the top band. I had my own quartet. I did a whole pile of solo work, and we played and played and played and played. But at the end of that year, I did a jury, and the teacher said, listen, you should come back and you should do a master's degree here in performance. And I thought, well, yeah. But all of the while, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, I did some good, really quality performances here, and they were successful, but I spent an awful lot of time worrying and fretting over that. And I didn't really believe in my heart of hearts that I had the temperament to deal with that, and to pursue it any further was going to be counterproductive for me, because I knew in my heart of hearts I wanted to teach. So I had a friend, Tim Hummel was his name. He played trumpet very well, and lived in Sarnia, played in the wind ensemble there, and said to me at the end of May, I guess, Fitzy, he said, I'm going to Western to study at Althouse in the music education faculty there. Come with me. You can stay at my place if you need to. You can use my place in Sarnia as a place for your practicum when you do it in Sarnia or wherever, but I think it's time. And I said, Tim, I like the sound of that. So I came home, talked to Bill Bartlett. Bill Bartlett got on the phone to somebody or some number of persons at Western and managed to get me in to Althouse for that September. I went there, and it was just a marvelous place to study music education. All of the kids in my class were musicians, had come through, mostly had come through the program at Western. The placements, the practicum opportunities that were there were just unbelievable. But first at Sarnia at Northern Collegiate, which was a great program. And then one of probably the premier programs in all of the country was at Saunders Secondary School in London, with Gwen Bynan as the head of the department. And I actually did 2 placements there. One was unofficial. I was supposed to be doing English, and I was during the periods that I was assigned it, but then the rest of the time I hung out in the music room. So then it was graduation from Western and time to decide what the career choice was going to be. I had an offer from PEI. There was a new intermediate school being built in Cornwall called East Wilshire School, and I met the principal that Christmas when I was home from Western, and he was just the most supportive of aesthetic education and just a brilliant human resources manager. This guy, Eldon Rogerson was his name. Gwyn Bynan at the same time wanted me to stay in London. He said he was going to make a position for me at Saunders, which was very flattering. And he said, if you don't stay, I'm going to call you every year until you come back, which I think he must have been drinking at the time, but no, he wasn't drinking at the time, but he was very kind. So anyway, I was kind of scared about the notion of teaching at a junior high school when all my practicums had been in senior high in Ontario. But I thought the idea of working with Eldon and to set up a program of my own from scratch was a temptation I couldn't resist. So I came home and took the job at East Wilshire, and away we went. I was there for 8 years.
So here you are, you're teaching on the island at East Wilshire, and you were there for what, 8 years?
Yes.
And after 8 years, there was a transition to another school. Could you speak to that very briefly, please?
I sure can. Very briefly, I'm not sure about. Yes, I of course, I'll be brief. Roger Jabbour, my longtime 50-year best friend, had been teaching in Montague when I was contemplating my move to teaching. And I spent a lot of time with him, watching him and admiring the work that he was doing. He then moved probably in 1984 to Colonel Gray, when Jerry Rutan retired. I was sort of midterm at East Wilshire then, teaching. I'd been there for 4 years. And Roger and I talked constantly about things that we'd like to do, things that we'd like to work out between our programs. We had toyed with the idea of starting a band camp, and actually did start a band camp as a pilot project with Queen Charlotte, where Roger was, and East Wilshire, where I was. We ran that for 2 years, and then we opened it up and it became the Unit 3 band camp. So there was an opportunity, there was an opening at Queen Charlotte, and I decided that I would take advantage of that opening and go and work right across the field from my friend. So I did, and I've stayed at Queen Charlotte for 22 years. When I arrived, the program was housed in a band mobile in the quadrangle out in the back. And then it was a refurbished gymnasium, outstanding music room a few years after that. And that's where I spent the bulk of my career.
Terrific. Rowan, as you know, I have visited your classroom at Queen Charlotte on so many occasions for a variety of reasons. And I just noticed among the hallmarks of your instrumental music pedagogy is demonstration. You would spontaneously grab an instrument and demonstrate for the class or for a specific group or group of students or an individual student. Could you speak to the importance of demonstration in your practice?
Certainly. I think it was Jim White at Althouse Western that's recommended to the students in his class, of which I was one, that every year when we started our teaching career, we should pick an instrument and spend some time learning that instrument to a reasonable degree, like probably a third year performance level. And so I thought, wow, that is a terrific idea. And I started, and I worked on flute, and I worked on clarinet, and I worked on trumpet, and so on. So bear in mind also that in 1980 and in 1988, when I was at Queen Charlotte, there was very little opportunity to hear samples of strong playing on the internet. Well, the internet was just in its infancy at that time. So kids, unless they went home or unless I recorded a cassette tape and brought it in and played it for them, which I did often, but unless I did that, there was no opportunity for them to hear what I was talking about specifically. So when I would take an instrument and demonstrate, I would give them a face-to-face in the same room idea of the tone that I was hoping that they would achieve and what I wanted them to work towards, or the kind of tonguing. And I was a good enough player on those instruments that I could at least illustrate those features for them live and in living color. The other thing I found out about teaching and working on an instrument was when I spent time trying to solve problems for myself, I accumulated some strategies that I eventually used with my students. I suffered the same frustrations that they had suffered, had the same problems, and managed to get around them somehow. So I had an idea of different tactics to try to solve problems that I saw in my own students' playing journeys. The other thing is, there's another aspect to this that I thought about only after the fact, but I think it's really significant reason, if for no other reason, to work on demonstrating for your students. And that is, there is a certain credibility that is established between students in a class and a teacher who can play basically all the instruments. And they would say to me, and I wouldn't play to try to impress them. I wanted them to hear something specific, but they'd say to me, can you play all these instruments? And I said, well, a little bit, yeah. And over the course of a year, I would have probably played every instrument in the band for them.
Mm.
And there's something that I remembered from seeing Jerry Rutan do much the same thing at Colonel Gray, where he would just grab an instrument from a kid and play it. And I was thinking, wow, that guy really knows his stuff. And I kind of think that having students see you do that gives you a credibility that lends itself towards them being more cooperative with you when you want musical goals accomplished by them. And I believe that that's a significant factor in bonding with your kids and in encouraging and inspiring them to be better players.
I couldn't agree more. Providing through demonstration a model of what you expect of them can have a far-reaching effect. So Rowan, let's just pivot to something else right now. So here you are entrenched as a junior high school instrumental music teacher at Queen Charlotte, and you get this invitation from the University of Prince Edward Island to return as an instructor, as a sessional instructor of saxophone. So could you speak to that period of your professional life?
That was in the early 90s, I believe, Karen. Is that time frame?
Yeah, I think so. I had become Department of Music chair at the time, and I had this big studio of woodwind players, and hiring you was a means to just help out with the overload, which you did very well. So could you talk about that experience?
It was it was really cool. It was probably I'm thinking that it was like late 90s, mid to late 90s. Not that that matters, other than I hadn't played saxophone seriously then for 20 years.
Hmm.
It's been 20 years since I've been thinking about that level of repertoire and that level of artistic performance. And so to have an opportunity to work again with that music and with students that were playing at that level was just delightful. Now, I was full out teaching at that time, and it was busy. There was lots of stuff going on the side as far as programmatic stuff and professional stuff and just other things that absorb time. But it was, I believe, Tuesday night we set up the students accommodated me and had lessons at all weird times that would work with my schedule. But it was extremely invigorating. It was reinvigorating from the point of view of my thoughts about being a player, and it drove me to my saxophones more. And the students were just superb there, and I was so proud of the work that they had done. And
Rowan, if I recall, it caused you to reconnect with your studies, with Jerry Danovich, and with Eugene Rousseau. And here was an opportunity for you to share, that pedagogy, that artistry, that musicianship with university music students.
well, that's how I would have hoped that it went, and I think for the most part, it was close to that. Yeah, it was a very exciting time, and
There
I
you go.
thank you for
Good.
the opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, okay. You're welcome. We just have a little bit of time left, Rowan. I do want to touch on your experience of conducting an honor band in Hong Kong. And I'm wondering, again, briefly, if you could just speak to how that came about and what the experience was like.
Um, Christmas of 2003, I got a phone call from a teacher who was formerly a music teacher in Edmonton. His name was Scott Rogel. He was a tenor sax player. And he said, I'm just finished the South Asia honors band with senior students and intermediate students. We just had a meeting with Dale Launis and Denise had done the intermediate band, Delaunis had done the senior band, and he said, they gave me your name as someone that might be interested and available to do this thing next November. And I said, well, first of all, I'm not really in their elite level of clinicians and workshop artists, but and that's probably over my head. Well, he said, they seem to think that you're a reasonable teacher and that you've done some good work, and we're willing to take a chance on you. And I thought, well, if you're willing to take a chance on bringing me to Hong Kong for 10 days on your ticket, then why would I ever dream of not greedily assuming that honor? And it did, and it was indeed an honor, and it was a thrill, and it was surreal. It was like being in a paradise. Hong Kong is just truly an incredible spot. And walking into the room with these students, mostly grade 8s from all over South Asia, Southeast Asia, the rim there, was just a tremendous experience. I brought some of my favorite literature with me, and I remember the concert. The concert was in 2 parts, of course, the intermediates first, the senior band later. And we opened with one of the tunes that I had seen you use with the Prince Edward Island Honors Band, and that was Jim Kernow's Fanfare and Flourishes 2. Actually, I'd heard you use the original at a band celebration that we did at the Confed Center. But we played that tune, and they were well-prepared students, these kids in Hong Kong. Their teachers had had the music for some time, and the piece just sat for them. So we opened with this piece, and I turned around to gesture to the band after the performance, and it was like people, I think, were slack-jawed and wide-eyed at how the band had sounded. The piece is a terrific opener to begin with, and they, as the children say today, slayed it. So
Indeed.
It was,
Rowan, I would agree. It's a great piece of music, but it takes a well-informed musician and pedagogue on the podium to draw the music out of them. So congratulations for that. Rowan, as we wrap up right now, I'm wondering if you might have a message for the current music students at the University of Prince Edward Island.
I thought about this because I knew this question might be coming. And let me just say directly to the students in the faculty at UPEI right now, and I know that probably you already realize a whole lot of the things I'm about to say, but I think I'm going to say it anyway. We are involved with a medium that is at once enigmatic, but extraordinarily powerful. What we do, whether we're performers or composers or teachers or listeners, is we create and produce sounds that have not only a spiritual dimension, but a visceral, physiological dimension. And I know there's been a bunch of work done on how sounds and sounds that are perfectly balanced create triggers for brain chemistry. They create endorphins. They create just the brain chemistry that makes us feel good as human beings. And it's odd because the chemistry is created in a part of the brain, but I believe that the chemistry that affects us bypasses the brain and goes directly to the heart. When we hear something that is beautifully played, there is a feeling of serotonin or whatever the chemistry happens to be that changes the way we feel about ourselves. I believe that it creates an empathy and a mutual understanding within the community of people that create the music, whether they be players or composers who want to transmit a certain message to listeners who maybe don't have the facility to play. We're doing something really significant, something that makes the world better. I truly believe that. I truly believe that what we do as musicians and teachers is not a job, but a calling. And I can't tell you what a delight it's been for me for 40 odd years to be involved in that career, to feel like it was worthwhile getting out of bed and enjoyable to get out of bed every day to do the job. So if you're like that about music, by all means pursue, and best of luck. There are lots of opportunities, and you couldn't find a more rewarding job. If, on the other hand, music is not your thing and it doesn't tweak you to get out of bed and be excited about studying whatever it is musically that you're studying, then pursue something else. Search for something else that gives you the same rush that music gives to me. Because I'll tell you, spending 8 hours a day of your working lives doing something that you love to do makes all the time that it took to find that career worthwhile.
That's a terrific message to end on, Rowan. Thank you on behalf of the UPEI music community for sharing your journey with us.
Thank you, Carol.